Welcome back to another episode of the AKI Built podcast. I'm your host, Alexa Crozier, and today we're continuing our exploration of what it takes to move beyond integration barriers in health tech and actually scale innovation in the real world. With me is Sona Shah, CEO and co-founder of Neopenda. Neopenda is a mission-driven health tech company focused on designing medical devices for emerging markets, starting with their award-winning neonatal monitor, the NeoGuard. What's unique about today's conversation is that we're not just talking about product development, we're talking about the human journey behind scaling innovation, from distribution and visibility to the very real operational demands of running a company that's doing business and doing good. Sona, welcome. Could you please give me a quick intro to your role at Neopenda and what first brought you into the world of global health innovation?
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me. It's really an honor. So I'm Sona, as you know, CEO and co-founder of Neopenda. We design medical technologies particularly for emerging markets. And I'll actually maybe just backtrack a little bit to why we started the company and my origin behind that. So I studied chemical engineering at Georgia Tech, graduated a semester early, had a job lined up in pharma, and didn't want to jump right into that. And so I went to Western Kenya and I was a primary school teacher out there. So really nothing to do with engineering, although I taught math and science. So maybe I helped create future engineers, who knows?
Yeah.
But I had gone into this experience as, a naive American thinking, I can change the world, and then walked away thinking, I don't really think I did anything for the community. But it did actually open my eyes to an entirely different world. It was beautiful, it was warm, it was a life without expectations. Where we lived, I didn't have running water or electricity for a majority of the time I was there. And so it was just a totally different environment that I was in. And it was incredible. I loved every second of it, except for the inequities that I was fortunate not to have growing up. And I saw this across the board, largely in healthcare, but I saw it across the board in many different areas of daily life. And that certainly stuck with me. So I came back to the US and started that job in pharma and really loved the healthcare and the engineering side. I was in bioprocess research and development, so it was a really wonderful part of the organization where we were creating medications that were going through clinical trials, and it was my first real job out of college, and so just really understanding what industry meant. And from there, kind of took those principles, product process development, just drinking from a fire hose and taking in everything I possibly could. But at some point I kept thinking that the kids that I taught in Kenya may never see the medications that I was helping make. And that was really the inequity that drove me back to graduate school to figure out how do we provide equitable access to healthcare around the world. Of course, I didn't know how to do that. So I went to Columbia University for my master's in biomedical engineering and picked the university because there was a lab that was creating an HIV and syphilis diagnostic, also had access to nonprofits, and so I worked at the TB Alliance, so the true New York lifestyle of too many jobs, no money, and living with bed bugs, but also an experience that I loved minus the bed bugs, again, drinking from a fire hose there. But it was really my second semester that I found our calling, and that's where I met my co-founder Tess, and we started to explore why newborn mortality is so much higher in low and middle income countries than in the US. And of course, there are truly 1,000 problems that contribute to that, but tinkering in our lab in New York wasn't going to solve any of them. So got funding from the university, went out to Uganda, and we did a needs assessment. And a lot of people haven't been to hospitals in African countries, and so I'll just paint the picture of the very first hospital that I had gone into. There were 150 babies, and there were 2 nurses, and these are critically ill, tiny babies that are desperately fighting for their life, and there were only 2 nurses available to help care for them. And to make things worse, the only equipment that we saw in the hospital was just collecting dust in a corner, taking up space and collecting dust because devices are not designed for the constraints of 85% of the world's population. They're designed for high-income countries that don't have to worry about power instability, dust getting into our equipment, all sorts of other constraints that make traditional equipment fail very quickly, even if it gets donated. So that's really why we started Neopenda 10 years ago.
Wow. I like the mission there to want to, service that community. What experiences or decisions do you think, if you were to look back on, were pivotal in getting you to where you are today, and how do those moments influence how you lead and operate inside the company now?
I think there's a few of those moments. When we first started in grad school, you're in grad school, I had no idea what uh, entrepreneurship really was.
You and me both.
Yeah, yeah. Now looking back, I was
Yeah.
actually quite inspired by my dad, who's an entrepreneur in many senses of the word. But he started
Mhm.
his own company before I was born, and so it's older than I was. It's a environmental consulting company, and so I think I've always had my dad to look up to, just for all the trials and tribulations that come along with starting your own company. And I think he just planted that bug without me even realizing what that meant. And so when I went to grad school and we saw this opportunity, there's no turning back from that. There's no turning back from seeing these patients that desperately need our help, and the whole world is turning their backs on them. We're trying as much as we can to support them, and the nurses are tirelessly working day in and day out. The doctors are working every single day to help these patients. But where are the engineers? Where are the biomedical technicians that are
Mm.
able to support these clinicians to give them the tools that they need to deliver high quality care? And we as a society just haven't shown up. And so I think that was one of the kind of turning points of why we started the company. Is you can't unsee that, and you can't let that go. And I think the flip side of it is, look, we're an impact driven organization, but there's also such a massive opportunity. Think about how many hospitals exist on the African continent that don't even have access to something as simple as a vital signs monitor, which is our first product. And so in Kenya alone, there's 13,000 health facilities. And so 13,000 health facilities that don't have technology because it's not designed with and for them. What if
Mhm.
we could create technologies that actually work in these environments? Then you have an entirely open market, where the competition isn't other vital signs monitors. It's other competition. It's other types of things that we have to worry about. But it's not equipment. And why not do good while doing well? So that's been a really exciting kind of point of our journey, is just the inspiration for why we do what we do every day. I think a couple of other moments that were just, early on, we realized during the R&D process that we spent a lot of our time in hospitals just shadowing nurses, in some cases becoming nurses ourselves, even though we're certainly not qualified to do that. And through that process, that helped inform the design of the product, first and foremost, which is super important for actually creating a product with and for our
Mhm.
users. But the other side of it was also, we can't just be good enough to get an A in a class. These are devices that are going on really small, really critically ill patients that have the opportunity to help save their life. Or if you do it wrong, it has the opportunity to harm them. And so this isn't just an A in a class. This is a real medical device that has to go through all the regulatory and quality considerations to make sure that it is safe for our tiniest patients and that it's working and doing what we expect it to do. And so I think that was a just pivotal moment, just being in these hospitals and really experiencing day in and day out what these nurses do. Seeing our manufacturing line was another big piece of it, because I think that was just a moment of, wow, this is where we're producing thousands of devices. We've gone through the hard parts of R&D and regulatory and all of these different considerations, and these are the tools that are going to make thousands of devices for us. And so that was a really exciting moment for us. But perhaps the
Mhm.
most exciting was when I actually saw those devices in commercial use
Yeah.
on patients for the first time. Being in these hospitals, hearing the experiences from the nurses, understanding that what we're doing is not only solving a real problem for these nurses, but it's paving the way for other medical device companies to come in and start to create products with and for communities. So it's just been a really exciting journey, knowing that we're filling a huge need.
Mhm. Seeing something that was in your head and then is in front of you. Like
Yeah.
you can touch it. It can serve a purpose. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Probably 1,000 stories similar to this where a device like that, like if you say you have two nurses on a ward of tons of babies, how are they going to monitor all those babies? Or even just if they want to even step up to the washroom, God forbid something happens, but then they have the ability to catch it, hopefully before an incident occurs that you can't turn back from, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that was one of the first stories that we actually heard. It's one of our nurses. She was caring for, I think, 5 or 6 patients in a smaller ward, but she had to go deliver it. She was the only one in the ward, and she had to go deliver paperwork to admin. She left, all the babies were fine. She came back and our alarms were blaring. And so she looked and she saw that one of the patients, their oxygen saturation dipped to really dangerous levels. And so she was able to go immediately to the patient, resuscitate the patient. And now the patient is alive and thriving. And that's exactly what we intend to do with our vital signs monitor. It's intended to take the really big, clunky patient monitors that just don't work in our environments and translate it into something that really does have an impact, and not just on the patients, but nurse efficiency, gathering data to understand what's actually happening in these hospitals, using that to guide what we want to create as our next products. So there's a whole ecosystem that we're building here.
That's amazing. What's been some of the harder decisions or moments you faced in trying to grow Neopenda's sustainability?
Yeah, we're going to need more than whatever amount of time we have for that. I
You're
think
like, this is an hour extra.
yeah, there we go.
Fair enough. The bottlenecks. Yeah. Yay.
So I'll try to kind of summarize
Totally.
some of the challenges that we've seen. I think in our space, there are very few people that are creating med tech specifically for emerging markets. That extends beyond the African continent and goes into emerging markets globally, which truly is 85% of the world. So it baffles me that this hasn't really been considered before. That being said, there aren't a lot of us that are doing it, which means there's no playbook. There's no playbook for, of course, design and development. There's plenty of medical devices that have rigorous processes. We're ISO 13485 certified, which means that we've got a robust quality management system. So we know how to make medical devices. The challenge is actually getting into the hospitals and understanding what their unique pain points are and really immersing ourselves in those ecosystems. Once you've gone through that, then understanding regulatory, we have CE mark on the product, which is the European version of FDA clearance, which gives us access to most of the countries that we're operating in. But oftentimes, many of our African countries have their own regulatory body. Many of these regulatory bodies are actively developing, and so oftentimes we find that pharmaceutical products is replaced with medical device, which is not the same. The process, the development process, the regulatory process, everything is different for a drug versus a medical device. And so we often see that as we are paving the way, constantly we're seeing regulations change, we're seeing new initiatives come out that we sometimes have to educate the ecosystem on what to do or how to do it, and then we have to learn it ourselves. So there's no playbook for that. Even once you get to the commercial stage, there's really not very many people that have successfully scaled across the continent, and it's not because it can't be done. It's because people haven't seen the opportunity. They haven't seen the immense opportunity that exists on the African continent. And so we are truly some of the first movers and shakers in this space, which means we fail a lot. It means we make a lot of mistakes, and that's fine. I think one of the biggest things we've learned is to be resilient and to figure out how to move mountains, because these patients deserve to have high quality access to care no matter where they are born. So I think all of our team is very aligned towards that mission, towards that vision, and that allows us to remove any of those barriers. I will touch on other challenges around funding. Funding for most startups is difficult. It's never an easy linear pathway of a round closes and you've got runway for years, at least not in our experience. And a lot of that is because we have to do a ton of education around the market opportunity that we see on the African continent. Your traditional med tech investors aren't looking at emerging markets as much as we are. There's a lot of opportunity here in the US, but the opportunity stays here in the US, and there's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of regulations that are changing on a daily basis right here. Why not tap into 85% of the world's population? But to do that, there's a lot of education that's required around why the market opportunity exists. On the flip side, investors that are investing into the African continent often don't know medtech. We are a heavily regulated industry that has hardware that is working on neonatal patients, that is a really tough industry to be working in. And so people don't necessarily understand all that it takes to actually get a product through regulatory clearance and to the market. And so, again, on that side, we have a lot of education that we have to do. And so we spend a lot of our time on the funding, educating, as opposed to taking in the questions, thoughtful questions from investors that actually help us grow and scale. So actually, we've raised $6 million to date, and this is a mix of grant funding. About half of it is grant funding, which allows us to de-risk the company. A lot of that goes towards R&D. It goes towards riskier elements that we can de-risk, and then the proven elements of the company where we can actually scale comes from investment dollars, which is about a little over 3 million of that 6 million in funding. So we've raised from angels, we've raised from institutionals, we've raised from family offices. So we've done all of that, but we find that education piece is often quite challenging. But when we're in this really exciting phase of transition to scale, it's not just about capital, it's tapping into expertise of individual people and the collective voice that we all can have to have meaningful change in our organization. And that's to both scale our impact and profitability. Those go hand in hand for us. So that's why we've opened up a crowdfunding equity campaign, a community investment round, to allow anybody in the world to invest in our company and to be able to provide their voice in helping us succeed.
Isn't it funny though how you hit a glass ceiling, then there's another glass ceiling, and another, and another,
It's never
and then the
enough.
world goes, "Well, I'll buy everyone's wine though." Like, no problem.
Yes, it's an
You sort
interesting
of,
space to be in where it's never enough. But
yeah. You sort of bled into my next question, and it was more just the biggest hurdle in scaling and distribution. A lot of the hits were on the education piece. So then instead of asking you that question, I'm going to ask, who are you trying to educate on this? Is it more the approvals process, like the regulatory party or bias of that? Or is it like hospitals, doctors, nurses, committees that will say yes to this product if it's private, if it's public?
yeah, I think all of the above. And we are still learning. This is not something that we can ever do alone. And so it's not just education on our side to others, it's education for us of how do we do things differently? We made a mistake. Let's fix it. How do we do it differently? And so it's both sides for sure. On the funding landscape, it's very much education about the market opportunity and why there's such a massive opportunity there. Or again, as I mentioned, on the flip side is just what it takes to become a medical device and why we are well positioned in that market space. We do find that the healthcare ecosystems are often, and this is around the world, not just in emerging markets, but they're fragmented. And so the traditional way to procure medical equipment in our markets is through donations, but donations end up in the graveyard. It's not sustainable. I had a nurse tell me once that the incubator was fully functional, but the instruction manual was in German. So how did she had no idea how to use the equipment.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just a really broken ecosystem around this. And so the education is also around, here's why a hospital should be investing with their limited resources. The markets that we're operating in do have limited resources. So here's why you should be investing in our product, in the NeoGuard system. And then from there, here's what we can deliver. It's the product itself, but it's also how do we deliver installation, preventative maintenance, reactive service, all of the things that make for successful product implementation. And I think that's the part that gets overlooked so often, is that the innovation is not just on the product itself. The innovation is on your business model. The innovation is on the customer support side. And that's a lot of the education that gets overlooked. I was reading an article the other day about an ecosystem tax. And when we're operating in the African ecosystem, so much of our time and energy goes towards that education that it's this unspoken tax that just nobody appreciates, because nobody really appreciates what it takes to, once you get the regulatory clearance, maintain your regulatory status. How many dollars go into your regulatory clearance? And that's just for maintenance. And so it's assumed that as a medical device company, you have these regulations, you have these certifications, but there's no acknowledgement of the work that goes into maintaining that. There's no acknowledgement that goes into the work of We're now in 50 plus hospitals in the markets that we're operating in. Half of not our existing investors, but half the investors I've spoken to never would have dreamed that that was where we are right now. And it's because we've, truly moved and shaped the space, but we've navigated all of those challenges and complexities that people previously thought, either didn't exist or were impossible to overcome.
Who's an ideal investor then? Is this something that globally someone could, you said you had a public way for anyone to donate, but then an ideal investor is a partner. You want a reoccurring relationship with that investor, correct?
Yes and no. So we've got a really strong investor base that many of whom have invested in multiple rounds throughout the company's cycle, and so our investors very much believe in where we're going and what we're doing, which has been really exciting. The public round is on WeFunder, which allows anybody in the world to invest in the company. It's not a donation, it's an investment. So they are, for as little as $100, you can put money into our company and have part ownership of what we're doing. And that really allows individual people to contribute not just their capital, but also the expertise that they might be able to provide. It's been so exciting just to see how many people have offered their support. The people that are leading this round work at Johnson and Johnson, and they are of African descent, and so they're this perfect mix of understanding medtech, but also knowing the challenges that exist in the African market. We want people that can help us open doors. We want people to tell us, look, in this next phase of growth, here's what you need to watch out for, because that's how we can actually grow the company and scale the company. And there are a lot of investors that know how to do that, but their LPs mandate that we have to be a certain level of revenue. We have to be, or we've consistently gotten, you're too early, you're too late, and there's no, happy medium with that. So we're turning to the community to help support us in this next phase of growth, to get to those milestones, to fit in the normal buckets that a VC might be looking for as a Series A round in the future.
Then if you could wave a magic wand to remove one operational like bottleneck right now, what would it be? And then how would that accelerate sort of next steps, whether that's new products or implementing it more globally, this current product?
I think the magic wand, it's a really exciting place to be in right now, because the biggest problem that we have is that there's actually too many growth opportunities. And I think we've seen time and again that startups fail because they, one, can't maintain focus, or two, scale before they're ready to. And a lot of that is back office stuff. A lot of it is the operational, how do you build your HR system to grow from a 10-person company to 100? That's a very different type of profile and company and systems that need to be created. But again, the ecosystem tax that doesn't allow us to really show others that this is the hard work that we're putting in now. The operational pieces around, do we have our accounting appropriate? We're working across multiple geographies, and do we know how to accept revenue and what the best way of doing that is? Of course, we can do that small scale at 50 hospitals, but what happens when we're in 1,000 hospitals and we're doing accounts payable and accounts receivable for 1,000 hospitals? That's a very different landscape.
My head's exploding just thinking about it.
Exactly. And so those are the types of things that I think have to be navigated right now. Transition to scale is super important, and we need to maintain focus on that. But we could expand geographically. We could expand our product portfolio. Now we know how to create medical devices, get it to market, get it to our customers, and have customers love it. We've gone through the entire cycle. We could do this again for thousands of products. How do we prioritize what we want to do next? Geographic, product portfolio, expansion of our existing product. It's mostly for neonates, but can we go to adults? Can we go to pediatric? Can we go to primary healthcare? There's just an endless amount of opportunity, which is a really exciting phase to be in. But if I had a magic wand, I would love for somebody to tell me this is exactly the path that you need to go in to grow, because it's the best for the ecosystem, or the best for profitability, the best for impact. Rarely do all of those combine into the same growth strategy, but that would be my magic wand.
It's interesting because in this space, not just even medical, but any business to business sort of relations, there's a lot of shifts with how we're dealing with the back end. I don't know if you guys have implemented anything in that space. How do I utilize and buy back time? Time is wealth to me, especially in what you do. Time is not just wealth, but it's lives saved, it's
Yes.
impact.
Yes.
So yeah, it's been such an honest and thoughtful conversation. And I really want to see this get into the hands and lives of people that need it the most. So, for listeners who want to learn more, I would love it if you could visit neopenda.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share. Your support helps us continue highlighting people shaping the intelligent future of healthcare. Until next time, I am Alexa Crozier, and this is the AKI Built podcast.